Hi there, and welcome to Coup English. In this series, we explore the lives of amazing people and help you improve your English at the same time. Ready? Let's dive in. Rosalind Franklin, The Hidden Light of DNA Discovery. Chapter 1. A Curious Child in Wartime London. Rosalind Franklin was born on July 25, 1920, in the city of London. She came into the world during a time of great change. The First World War had ended only 2 years earlier, and the world was still recovering. Her family lived in a large, comfortable house in Notting Hill, a part of West London. Her father, Ellis Franklin, worked in banking and came from a long line of educated, socially active people. Her mother, Muriel Franklin, came from a family that valued learning and culture. Education was not just encouraged, it was expected. The Franklins were part of a well-known Jewish community in Britain, though they were not especially religious. They were deeply involved in social work and believed in justice, fairness, and equality. Rosalind grew up in a household where books lined the shelves, where adults discussed politics and world events at the dinner table, and where children were expected to think for themselves. This environment shaped Rosalind's mind and gave her confidence in the power of ideas. From a young age, Rosalind showed a quiet but powerful intelligence. She wasn't loud or playful like some children. She was serious, focused, and deeply curious. Her younger brother once said that even when she was just a child, she already had the sharp, intense eyes of a scientist. She asked difficult questions. Why is the sky blue? What makes plants grow? How does light travel? Adults often didn't know how to answer her. At age 6, Rosalind began attending a private school for girls. Her teachers quickly noticed her strong ability in math and science. She was not only smart, she was determined. While other students were content with doing just enough to pass, Rosalind pushed herself. She wanted to understand how things worked, and she wanted to prove that she could succeed, even in subjects many believed were not for girls. In the 1930s, Britain was changing rapidly. The Great Depression affected many families, and in Europe, dark clouds were gathering as Nazi Germany rose to power. As Jews, the Franklins were deeply aware of the danger. They followed the news closely and often talked about what was happening in Germany. Rosalind's parents even helped Jewish refugees escape from Europe, offering them shelter in their home. This had a strong impact on young Rosalind. She learned not only about science and books, but also about human suffering, courage, and responsibility. At St. Paul's Girls' School, Rosalind found a place where her intellect was not only accepted, but celebrated. It was one of the few schools in Britain that offered girls a strong science education at the time. She loved chemistry and physics. She liked the certainty of numbers and the way science could explain the natural world. One of her favorite teachers, Miss Dixon, once said that Rosalind had a scientific mind of rare clarity. She also read widely. She enjoyed literature, especially poetry, but it was science that captured her imagination. She was fascinated by the structure of things, rocks, crystals, atoms. She saw beauty in patterns, and she began to dream of becoming a scientist, even though it was not a typical path for a girl. Her father, Ellis, however, was not immediately supportive. Though he believed in education for all his children, he worried that science was not a suitable career for a woman. He hoped Rosalind would choose something more traditional, like teaching. But Rosalind had made up her mind. She told him firmly, "I want to be a scientist," and in time, he respected her choice, even if he did not fully understand it. By the time Rosalind turned 16, her academic record was excellent. She had passed her exams with top scores and won a scholarship to continue her studies. World War II had just begun, and bombs were falling on London. Life was uncertain, and many young people were being forced to change their plans. But Rosalind did not give up. She believed that science was more important than ever in a world full of conflict. She applied to Cambridge University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. It was still unusual for women to study science there, but Rosalind was determined to break through. She was accepted to Newham College, one of the few women's colleges at Cambridge. In 1938, she left her family and moved to Cambridge to begin a new chapter in her life. She was only 18, but she was already thinking like a scientist. Chapter 2: Cambridge Dreams and the Chemistry of War. When Rosalind Franklin arrived at Cambridge University in 1938, she was both excited and nervous. Cambridge was one of the most respected universities in the world, and it had produced many of the greatest minds in science. Yet, even there, women were not always treated equally. Only a few colleges accepted women, and even fewer allowed them full academic rights. Still, Rosalind didn't let this bother her. She was there to learn, and she would not be distracted. She studied natural sciences at Newham College, focusing on chemistry, physics, and mathematics. The academic environment at Cambridge was demanding, but it suited her. Rosalind loved the challenge of complex ideas and was energized by the pace of learning. She often spent long hours in the lab or reading late into the night. She wasn't interested in small talk or social events. Her world was one of molecules, reactions, and deep thought. She had great respect for her tutors, though she did not always agree with them. She was not afraid to challenge ideas or ask hard questions, which sometimes made her seem stubborn or overly serious. But Rosalind believed that science should never be about personality or popularity. It should be about facts, evidence, and clarity. The world outside Cambridge, however, was changing quickly. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and Britain declared war. The Second World War had begun. Air raid sirens became part of everyday life, and blackout curtains were hung across windows at night. Many students left school to join the war effort, and universities shifted their focus to research that could help win the war. Rosalind did not join the army or become a nurse. She believed she could serve her country best by using her scientific skills. After graduating in 1941 with honors, she took a research job at the British Coal Utilisation Research Association, BCURA. While not a glamorous post, it was important. Britain needed to find better ways to use coal, one of its main energy sources, especially with war supplies limited. At BCURA, Rosalind studied the porosity and density of coal. These words may sound dry, but they held powerful meaning. Understanding the structure of coal helped scientists improve gas masks, build better fuel systems, and even strengthen aircraft materials. Her research was detailed and highly technical. She worked with X-rays, microscopes, and models to explore coal's internal structure. This was her first experience using physical tools to uncover the hidden order inside matter, something that would later play a major role in her DNA work. Even in this early stage of her career, Rosalind stood out. Her work on coal became the basis of several important papers. More importantly, it helped her develop a skill that would define her future: the ability to see the invisible, to understand complex structures without ever truly seeing them with the naked eye. She was also learning how to survive in a world that often did not take female scientists seriously. In a male-dominated environment, she had to work twice as hard to prove herself. She avoided casual friendships and kept her personal life private. Some colleagues found her cold or distant, but others respected her discipline and independence. She was not trying to be liked. She was trying to make discoveries. Outside of the lab, the war continued to reshape life. London was bombed nightly during the Blitz. Food and fuel were rationed. People lived with fear and loss. But for Rosalind, the war was also a time of purpose. Her research had meaning. She was contributing. She was growing stronger, both as a scientist and as a person. In 1945, when the war finally ended, the world breathed a sigh of relief. For many, it was time to return to normal life. But for Rosalind, it was time to go further. She had learned all she could at BCURA. She wanted more science, more discovery, more challenge. With strong recommendations and a growing list of publications, she applied for a position in France at the Laboratoire Central des Services Chimiques de l'État in Paris. It was an exciting opportunity. France had its own strong tradition of chemistry and physics, and the lab in Paris was doing pioneering work in X-ray crystallography, a method used to understand the arrangement of atoms in a solid. Rosalind had already worked with X-rays in coal research, but this was a chance to master a new and more powerful tool. So, In 1947, she packed her bags and moved to Paris. She was 27 years old and ready to take the next step in her scientific journey. Chapter 3. Paris and the Crystal Lattice. Paris, in 1947, was a city rebuilding itself. The war had left scars, buildings damaged, lives lost, and an economy still struggling. But in the quiet corridors of scientific laboratories, the future was taking shape. Rosalind Franklin stepped into this world with a clear purpose. She had come to learn, to grow, and to master a powerful scientific tool, X-ray crystallography. She joined the Laboratoire Central des Services Chimiques de Lattice, working under Jacques Méring, a physicist known for his precision and insight. Méring quickly recognized Rosalind's intelligence and discipline. He gave her the space and freedom to pursue her work independently, something she had rarely experienced in England. Unlike the rigid structure she was used to, the French lab culture was more relaxed, open, and filled with discussion. Rosalind flourished in this environment. She began applying X-ray crystallography to amorphous substances, particularly carbon-based materials. While her earlier work on coal had focused on porosity and density, she now turned her attention to molecular arrangement, the deeper internal order hidden inside seemingly chaotic materials. Using X-ray diffraction patterns, she could create detailed maps of how atoms were structured within a substance. It was like solving a puzzle where each piece was invisible to the eye, but visible through mathematics and light. Crystallography required patience and precision. Rosalind was well suited to it. She had an almost obsessive attention to detail and a methodical approach to experimentation. She learned how to prepare samples, control exposure, analyze diffraction patterns, and write clear, exact papers. Her work during these years laid the foundation for what would become her signature scientific method: rigorous, repeatable, and focused on facts rather than speculation. Outside the lab, Paris offered a very different kind of education. The culture was vibrant, intellectual, and full of life. Rosalind enjoyed French cinema, literature, and long conversations with colleagues. She finally allowed herself to relax a little, to enjoy the rhythm of life outside science. Her French became fluent, and for the first time in years, she felt socially accepted as both a woman and a scientist. She formed friendships with other researchers, both men and women, based on mutual respect and shared curiosity. These relationships were not sentimental, but they gave her a sense of belonging. Unlike her time in British institutions, she did not feel like she constantly had to defend her right to be in the room. In Paris, she was seen for her mind, not her gender. But Rosalind never stayed comfortable for long. By 1950, she began to feel the pull of new challenges. She had mastered crystallography techniques and published important findings on carbon structure. She wanted to apply these skills to more complex biological materials. Somewhere in the future, she sensed a greater mystery waiting, one that involved life itself. It was around this time that King's College London reached out. The college's biophysics unit, led by John Randall, was exploring X-ray studies of biological molecules, specifically DNA. They needed someone with exact experience in X-ray crystallography. Rosalind was the perfect match. She was offered a 3-year fellowship and a chance to lead her own work on DNA fibers. The decision to leave Paris was not easy. She had grown attached to the city, to her colleagues, and to the scientific freedom she had found there. But the opportunity to work on the building blocks of life was too great to ignore. Rosalind knew that DNA was one of the most important scientific frontiers of the age. To study it was to come face to face with the very code of existence. In 1951, she said goodbye to Paris and returned to England. She was 30 years old, confident, well-trained, and prepared for the challenge ahead. What she did not know was that the greatest test of her scientific and personal strength was about to begin. Chapter 4. Into the Heart of the Helix. In early 1951, Rosalind Franklin returned to London, stepping into the world of DNA research. She joined the biophysics unit at King's College London, invited by its director, John Randall. with her solid background in X-ray crystallography, she was expected to bring new precision and clarity to their efforts in studying biological molecules. At first, the offer seemed ideal. She was promised independent research, access to advanced equipment, and the freedom to apply her expertise to a critical scientific mystery, the structure of deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. But things quickly turned out to be more complicated. From the beginning, Rosalind faced an unclear arrangement. Maurice Wilkins, another scientist at King's College, had already been working on DNA. He believed that Franklin was joining as his assistant. Rosalind, on the other hand, had been told she would lead her own independent project. This misunderstanding led to tension between them almost immediately. Their personalities didn't help. Wilkins was quiet, reserved, and preferred to avoid direct confrontation. Rosalind was outspoken, exacting, and fiercely protective of her scientific standards. Despite the confusion and strained working relationship, Franklin went straight to work. DNA samples were notoriously difficult to study. They could exist in different forms depending on humidity and salt levels. Franklin focused on two of these forms. She called them the A and B forms. The A form was dry and showed sharp diffraction patterns. The B form was moist and produced more mysterious, ghostly images. Using X-ray crystallography, she began taking precise measurements, photographing the diffraction patterns, and interpreting them with mathematical rigor. This was not a simple task. Each image required hours of careful setup and analysis. The process demanded patience, technical skill, and a willingness to dive deep into fine detail. Franklin developed methods to control the DNA's hydration and purity. She improved the imaging process so much that her photographs became the clearest available at the time. One of these, later known as Photo 51, would become one of the most famous images in scientific history. Photo 51 showed a distinct X-shaped diffraction pattern, strong evidence that DNA had a helical or spiral structure. But at the time, Rosalind was cautious. She believed science should not jump to conclusions. She continued to analyze all possible models, not rushing toward the Helix hypothesis without more support. Meanwhile, at the University of Cambridge, two scientists, James Watson and Francis Crick, were also working on DNA. Unlike Rosalind, they were not experimentalists. They preferred to build theoretical models, using available data from others. They had already built one incorrect model of DNA and had been told to stop working on it, but they remained fascinated. In 1953, things took a critical turn. Maurice Wilkins, without Rosalind's knowledge, showed Photo 51 to Watson during a visit. The moment Watson saw the image, everything clicked. It provided the missing piece for him and Crick to finalize their double helix model. Around the same time, Rosalind was preparing to leave King's College. Tired of the institutional politics and seeking a more supportive environment, she had accepted a position at Birkbeck College. Before her departure, she had written a comprehensive report on her findings. Ironically, this report was shared, again, without her direct consent, with Watson and Crick, further aiding their model construction. In April 1953, Watson and Crick published their groundbreaking paper in Nature, proposing the double helix structure. In the same issue, Franklin's own data and interpretations were published as supporting evidence. But her role was minimized. There was no mention that her images had been shared without permission, and no clear recognition of the key role her data had played in the discovery. Rosalind never complained publicly. She simply continued her work. Chapter 5. A New Beginning at Birkbeck. In March 1953, just weeks before Watson and Crick revealed their double helix model, Rosalind Franklin left King's College for Birkbeck College, part of the University of London. It was more than a change in address. It was a personal and professional reset. At Birkbeck, she joined the Department of Crystallography under the leadership of physicist J.D. Burnell, a respected but unconventional figure in British science. Unlike the rigid and hierarchical atmosphere she had experienced at King's, Burnell's lab encouraged creativity, independence, and cross-disciplinary collaboration. Rosalind found herself in an environment where her expertise was valued and her ideas respected. Yet, the transition wasn't without challenge. Her new research focused not on DNA, but on viruses, a subject she knew little about. But as always, she was ready to learn. Franklin began studying the tobacco mosaic virus TMV, a plant virus that had fascinated scientists for decades. TMV had a unique cylindrical shape, and scientists were still unsure of how its RNA, the genetic material, was arranged inside the virus particle. Franklin threw herself into the problem. She applied the same X-ray diffraction techniques she had mastered during her DNA work, bringing clarity to this new biological puzzle. Using samples prepared by plant pathologists and virologists, she began capturing higher-resolution images of TMV. The process was labor-intensive and required precise alignment, consistent temperature control, and hours of darkroom development. Her images revealed something remarkable. TMV was built with a high degree of symmetry. The RNA molecule was not simply placed at the center of the virus, but was threaded like a ribbon along the inside of a helical protein shell. This discovery reshaped scientists' understanding of viral structure. Once again, Franklin was proving that careful observation and methodical thinking could unlock nature's deepest secrets. At Birkbeck, Rosalind also led her own research team for the first time. Among her colleagues was a young researcher named Aaron Klug, who would later win the Nobel Prize for his work on complex molecular structures. Franklin was a demanding but generous mentor. She pushed her team hard, insisting on precision, clarity, and honesty in their work, but she also inspired them with her energy and passion. Despite the emotional wounds left by her time at King's College, she rarely looked back. She did not speak publicly about the role her DNA images played in the double helix discovery, even after Watson and Crick's fame grew. For Franklin, the pursuit of truth through science remained more important than personal credit. She continued to publish important papers on viruses, and her reputation in the field steadily grew. She was invited to international conferences and collaborated with researchers in the United States. In particular, her work on the cucumber virus and turnip yellow mosaic virus added new knowledge to the growing field of structural virology. Franklin was finally in a place where her work was not only groundbreaking but also appreciated. She was forming a legacy in a second field of science, something few scientists ever accomplish in one lifetime. But behind the professional momentum, a quiet battle was beginning inside her body, one that she did not yet recognize. Chapter 6: Expanding Horizons and Emerging Shadows. By 1956, Rosalind Franklin had built a strong and growing reputation at Birkbeck College. Her work on viruses was drawing attention from researchers around the world. For the first time in her career, she felt recognized not just for her techniques, but for her scientific insight. Franklin's studies of the tobacco mosaic virus, TMV, had already broken new ground. Now, she expanded her research to include other viruses, such as the cucumber virus and the turnip yellow mosaic virus. Each one posed new structural puzzles. Each required patience, precision, and deep understanding of molecular geometry, and Franklin was at the center of it all. Her collaboration with young scientists like Aaron Klug was also growing in importance. Klug admired Franklin's clarity of thought and her refusal to accept assumptions without evidence. Their work together became more than just experiments. It was a partnership built on respect, rigor, and discovery. Franklin's mentorship helped Klug refine his methods and develop the skills that would eventually lead him to a Nobel Prize. Franklin's confidence was also reflected in her expanding international reach. She traveled to the United States in early 1956 to work with prominent virologists at the University of California, Berkeley. There, she met with scientists who admired her work and invited her to collaborate on studies involving even more complex viruses. She spoke at conferences, presented her findings, and impressed audiences with her direct, clear explanations. Despite these professional successes, a quiet discomfort began to follow her. At first, she brushed it off as stress or fatigue. Long hours at the lab, international travel, and intense focus can wear on anyone. but the pain in her lower abdomen became harder to ignore. By the summer of 1956, the pain had grown worse. She visited doctors and eventually underwent surgery. The news was serious ovarian cancer. Franklin, always rational and composed, took the diagnosis with calm determination. She did not tell many people. Instead, she returned to work between hospital stays and chemotherapy sessions. To her colleagues, she seemed as dedicated as ever. Few realized how ill she truly was. Franklin never wanted pity. She preferred to be known for her research, not her illness. In her mind, there was still so much to do. During this period, her productivity remained astonishing. She continued publishing papers, developing new insights into viral structure, and mentoring her growing team. Her collaborations with American scientists deepened. She worked on complex icosahedral viruses, those shaped like 20-sided dice, revealing the mathematical patterns behind their structures. One of her final major projects was on the poliovirus. Though she would not live to finish this research, the groundwork she laid became foundational for the field of virology. Even as the illness advanced, Franklin rarely slowed down. She worked when she could and rested only when absolutely necessary. Her notebooks remained detailed and her observations sharp. It was as though the threat of time slipping away pushed her to achieve more, to give all she could while she could. In the quiet spaces between hospital visits and lab experiments, she corresponded with colleagues, planned future papers, and encouraged her team to keep going. Science had always been her purpose. Now, more than ever, it gave her strength. By the end of 1957, her condition had worsened, but her legacy both in DNA and virology was already beginning to take shape. Colleagues and students who worked with her were deeply affected, not only by her knowledge, but by her dignity and determination in the face of illness. Rosalind Franklin was facing the end with the same focus and grace that had defined her life's work, but her story was far from over. Chapter 7. Racing Against Time. In 1957, Rosalind Franklin knew her time was limited. The cancer that had quietly spread through her body was now making itself known, yet, despite the pain, surgeries, and rounds of chemotherapy, she returned to the lab whenever possible. To Franklin, every moment mattered. There were still viruses to decode, patterns to uncover, and young scientists to guide. Her team at Birkbeck College was growing stronger. Franklin had trained them well, not just in technique, but in how to think, question, and persist. Aaron Klug, now a trusted partner, began taking on more responsibility. Franklin encouraged him to lead more of the structural analysis as her own health declined. She still reviewed data, offered critiques, and contributed ideas, but she was also preparing her team for a future without her. One of her final scientific pursuits was a deep structural investigation of the poliovirus. Poliovirus was complex and dangerous, a challenge even for the most experienced scientists, but Franklin welcomed the challenge. She believed that solving its structure could help lead to better treatments or even prevention strategies. Her team used X-ray diffraction to study the virus, and the patterns that emerged hinted at a stunningly elegant design, 20 triangular faces forming a perfect icosahedron. Even as her strength faded, Franklin's mind remained sharp. Her notebooks were filled with careful calculations and thoughtful diagrams. She corresponded with colleagues in the United States and Europe, sharing findings and proposing joint projects. To many, it was hard to believe she was seriously ill. She never spoke about her condition in public, and only a few close friends knew the truth. One such friend was Anne Sayre, who often visited Franklin during her hospital stays. The two shared long conversations about science, writing, and life. Sayre later wrote a biography that helped restore Franklin's image in the public eye, especially in response to how her role in the discovery of DNA had been overlooked or misunderstood. In April 1958, Franklin entered the hospital for the last time. Even from her hospital bed, she asked for research updates. She remained curious, driven, and committed to the end. On April 16, 1958, she passed away at the age of 37. Her death came far too early, but her legacy had already begun to take root. After her passing, Her colleagues published several of her final papers posthumously. Her work on the poliovirus became a foundation for future studies in structural virology. Aaron Klug, continuing on the path she helped shape, went on to win the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1982 for his work in crystallography and virus structure, an achievement deeply rooted in their early partnership. What set Rosalind Franklin apart was not just her technical brilliance, but her refusal to compromise her standards. She valued truth, evidence, and clarity. She challenged ideas, resisted bias, and opened doors, whether she meant to or not, for other women in science. She showed that persistence and precision could coexist with creativity and care. In those final months, Franklin may have sensed that her work was just the beginning. Though she did not live to see the broader impact of her research, the seeds she planted would blossom in countless ways, in medicine, molecular biology, and the continuing fight for recognition of women's contributions to science. Franklin did not need fame. She needed understanding, and through the work she left behind, the world would begin to understand not only the structure of life itself, but also the quiet strength of a woman who spent her final year racing against time and winning in ways that truly mattered. Chapter 8: A Legacy Ignited. When Rosalind Franklin died in April 1958, the scientific world lost one of its sharpest and most driven minds, at only 37 years old. Her career had spanned less than 2 decades, but the influence of her work would stretch far beyond her lifetime. For many years, however, her name remained in the background, known to a few scientists, rarely mentioned in public discussions of the DNA breakthrough. The double helix had become a scientific icon, but the woman who photographed it had been nearly forgotten. In the 1960s, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded to James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins for their discovery of the DNA double helix. By then, Franklin had already passed away. The Nobel Committee does not award prizes posthumously, so her name was not mentioned in the honors. More importantly, outside of Wilkins' brief acknowledgement of her technical contribution, there was little recognition of how her famous Photo 51 and her rigorous X-ray diffraction analysis had provided the very evidence needed to confirm the DNA model. It was not until the 1970s that her story began to rise again, this time through the voices of those who admired her and felt justice was overdue. Among them was Anne Sayre, her longtime friend. In 1975, Sayre published Rosalind Franklin and DNA, a book that challenged the narratives presented by James Watson in his own account. The double helix, which had portrayed Franklin unfairly and in a patronizing tone. Sayre's biography painted a more accurate and human picture, a determined scientist, exacting in her work, private but not cold, brilliant yet isolated in a male-dominated system. This narrative resonated deeply with women in science and feminist scholars, who saw in Franklin a symbol of both excellence and the struggles faced by capable women in underappreciated roles. Soon, universities, scientific journals, and institutions began revisiting Franklin's contributions. New generations of scientists read her papers on DNA, viruses, and coal. They admired the precision of her methods, the clarity of her reasoning, and the discipline of her approach. What had once seemed like technical support was now clearly essential groundwork. Her legacy also grew through the work of her colleagues. Aaron Klug, whom she had mentored at Birkbeck, continued the study of virus structures using techniques she had pioneered. He often credited Franklin with establishing the scientific foundation for much of his later success. In 1982, when Klug received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for his work in crystallography, many saw it as a delayed recognition of Franklin's pioneering path. Beyond science, Franklin became a powerful figure in discussions about gender, recognition, and fairness in academic culture. Her story began appearing in textbooks, museum exhibits, and university lectures. Young scientists, especially women, looked to her life as proof that excellence does not always come with applause, but that it still matters deeply. In 1992, a memorial plaque was installed at King's College London, honoring her contribution to the discovery of DNA's structure. In 2004, a Mars rover was named Rosalind Franklin, a symbolic journey for a woman whose life was spent exploring the invisible architecture of life itself. Buildings, research centers, and scholarships began to bear her name, ensuring future generations would not forget. Franklin's legacy is not only what she discovered, but how she worked. She demanded accuracy. She pursued truth for its own sake. She remained focused amid distractions and dignified in the face of bias. While others raced for headlines, she quietly built the evidence that would shape the future. Her story reminds us that science is not a solo race, but a shared journey. It is made of many minds, many moments, and sometimes the most essential contributions come from those whose names we almost miss. Chapter 9. Beyond the Double Helix, Influence Across Generations. Rosalind Franklin's legacy, once overlooked, has become a beacon of inspiration across fields and generations. Though she passed away long before the age of digital media or widespread science outreach, her image and ideas have traveled far, reaching classrooms, conferences, documentaries, and even political discussions. What was once a quiet shadow has now become a clear and compelling light. One of the most significant areas of her posthumous impact lies in the advancement of women in science. As awareness of Franklin's role in the DNA discovery grew, so did public conversations about gender bias in research. Educators, activists, and scientists began referencing her case as a symbol of the unrecognized labor and intelligence of women across disciplines. Her story helped change the way institutions evaluated contributions and supported diversity in academic spaces. The Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science in Illinois, established in 2004, was one of the first major institutions named entirely in her honor. Its mission, interdisciplinary collaboration and scientific excellence, mirrors the way Franklin herself worked. The university trains doctors, researchers, and healthcare professionals, embedding her legacy directly into the lives of thousands of students. In popular culture, Franklin's name gained momentum through documentaries, plays, and novels. Anna Ziegler's 2015 play Photograph 51 gained international acclaim, with actress Nicole Kidman portraying Franklin in London's West End. The play highlighted not only Franklin's scientific genius, but also the emotional complexity of her work life, her isolation, her dedication, and her inner strength. These retellings have also led to broader appreciation of Franklin's entire body of work, not just her DNA research. Many scientists point out that her virus research at Birkbeck College laid the groundwork for later developments in structural virology. She and her team created some of the earliest models of how RNA viruses replicate and organize. Her rigorous use of X-ray crystallography influenced methods used to study modern viruses, including coronaviruses and influenza. In academic writing, Franklin is now cited not just as a historical figure, but as a methodological innovator. Her approach, precise, disciplined, and deeply analytical, is often presented as a gold standard for experimental design. As universities push for better research integrity, her meticulous documentation and commitment to empirical data are held up as examples of best practice. Even NASA paid tribute to her legacy by naming the ExoMars 2022 rover after her. Though the mission faced delays, the symbolic act sent a strong message. Franklin's work helped us understand the foundations of life on Earth, and now her name would travel in the search for life beyond Earth. Rosalind Franklin also indirectly shaped the ethics of science communication. Her story is taught alongside discussions of credit sharing, publication practices, and gender representation in research teams. Scientific organizations have used her life as a lens to examine fairness in authorship and collaboration, especially in large interdisciplinary teams where contributions can easily be overshadowed. Perhaps the most remarkable part of her influence is this: even though she never sought fame or public attention, Franklin's quiet integrity left a deep and lasting impression. In a world where visibility is often confused with value, she reminds us that meaningful work can outlive recognition and that truth, pursued with discipline and clarity, has a power of its own. Chapter 10. A Flame That Never Died. The Enduring Spirit of Rosalind Franklin. Rosalind Franklin died on April 16, 1958, at just 37 years old. Her life, though brief, was a model of clarity, purpose, and brilliance. Her final months were filled with continued work, despite the cancer that gradually wore her down. Even while undergoing treatments, she returned to her lab when she could, determined to contribute until the very end. Her passing came as a shock to many colleagues. Maurice Wilkins, James Watson, and Francis Crick, all of whom had relied on her data to build the model of DNA, attended her funeral. In later years, Wilkins expressed regret over their lack of cooperation and understanding, recognizing that Franklin's brilliance had not been given due respect. Watson, in his memoir, The Double Helix, would admit to underestimating her, prompting criticism and later reflection about how she had been portrayed. Though she never lived to see the Nobel Prize awarded to Watson, Crick, and Wilkins in 1962, Franklin's name has since been recognized as an essential part of the DNA story. Many now believe the Nobel Committee should have acknowledged her contribution more formally had she been alive. According to Nobel rules, the prize cannot be awarded posthumously, but history and the scientific community have tried to correct that omission. But to define Rosalind Franklin solely by the controversy surrounding DNA would be to miss the full measure of her genius. Her contributions to coal chemistry, virus structure, and X-ray diffraction techniques showed a level of discipline and intellectual rigor that few could match. She tackled every problem with unwavering focus and demanded excellence, not just from others, but most fiercely from herself. She was not merely a woman in science, she was a scientist of the highest order. That she was a woman in a male-dominated field only added to the challenge, but never distracted her. In many ways, she was ahead of her time, not only in her techniques, but in her quiet insistence that truth, not recognition, was what mattered most. Franklin never married, and many of her closest connections were within the academic community. She remained devoted to her family and corresponded regularly with her parents and siblings. Her letters, now archived and published, reveal a thoughtful, warm, and witty personality, far from the cold or combative image that early narratives sometimes painted. She loved traveling, especially to France, and was a keen observer of art, architecture, and history. Her Paris years remained among her fondest memories. Today, schools, research institutes, fellowships, and awards bear her name. The Rosalind Franklin Award, established by the UK's Royal Society, supports outstanding women in science. Countless girls and young researchers have seen in her story a reflection of their own struggles and potential. She is no longer simply a figure from the past, she is a source of inspiration for the future. Her story teaches us that the pursuit of knowledge is not always easy or fair. Recognition may come late or not at all, but in the end, what matters most is the work itself. The courage to ask hard questions, the discipline to find real answers, and the humility to let the truth speak louder than the ego. In the quiet moments of every laboratory, in every scientist who questions, measures, tests, and wonders, there is a part of Rosalind Franklin. She may have been gone for decades, but her spirit remains. It flickers like the sharp beam of X-ray light she once mastered, cutting through uncertainty, revealing the shape of truth. Thanks for learning with Ku English. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time.